Today in the bunker, we're going to build a refinery stack suitable for post-apocalyptic gaming. One of the byproducts of 3D printing with PLA or some other materials, but anything that uses a spool, is the spool itself when it's empty. In this case, this is a hatch box. I used this for a while, now I've switched to ceramic, but the spools are pretty similar for most of them. And the question becomes, well, what do I do with the spool when I'm done? And you can throw them away. Some of them are recyclable. Some people like to turn them into terrain, so I started to experiment with that. And one of the things that is kind of vexing is making a suitable surface on here. So I got out some chipboard and some drywall tape and started to experiment with that. Also, I just hot glued some corrugated cardboard on the center post. You could do that by making corrugated card, like in one of my earlier videos I show how to do that. You can use that cardboard that's like that, or the corrugated paper. This was packing material out of some large box. But what I've done here is taken some chipboard and cut it 5 millimeters wide and about 60 millimeters long, because that's the size that it is needed here. Your size may vary depending on the spool you have. And just hot glued it down, and then made some curved pieces that I can kind of fill that gap in, and then added that drywall tape. So I'm going to do a section or two up here on top just so you can see how I did that. Now the straight sections are pretty straightforward. You just measure those and cut them out. The rounded sections, what I did was I just took the actual spool itself, laid it on there, traced a section of the curve, then measured back 5 millimeters and did that again. And then you can just cut that piece out and cut sections out of it to fit. Full disclosure, the first one I did, I actually cut the full circle out and then measured inside. Don't do that. Just do it this way. It's a lot easier. So, all right, so let me get everything set up and we'll get started. I've chosen to stay with the sections that are on here. Because these spokes already kind of give you a guide as to where to place these things. And also the width of the drywall tape fits pretty nicely in that space. So you can cut that out of one section. You don't have to kind of splice in other sections. So we just take our chipboard piece and apply some glue to it. And I start on the sections where that opening is on the side, because that gives you a bit of an extra point to kind of aim at. And if you cut these a little long, it's no big deal. You can just cut that off when it hangs over the edge. Just be sure to glue it on there straight is the biggest thing. And get your excess out of there. Alright, so let's do another one. And I'm going to do those two first so I can kind of eyeball that middle one and make sure that it's a little more straight. So we'll just add our glue, trying not to glue our fingers or burn ourselves, because I have a tendency to do that, to the point that someone suggested making a drinking game out of that. I suggest you don't. You will probably die from alcohol poisoning. So it's just easier if you... I don't want really my subscribers to die, so that would be bad. Alright, so that's fairly even. Okay, so let's fill in that end piece. We'll take our curved piece that we cut earlier and just kind of size that up. And I just measure, because I do this all by eye, I have to measure each piece. It doesn't take very long. if you're really clever, you could do this with a template or something, and I'm not that clever, so I'll just make sure that fits. Give it a good dose of glue. Okay, on the bottom one I had that corrugated in there, and it didn't really need any filling, but I'm guessing maybe at the top that might be good to actually fill that in. I guess that's depending on what you're going to set up on there. What I'm going to have in here will probably either butt right up against that or overlap it slightly. So I'm going to leave it as is. And you can see here I got off on my measurements a little bit, so we'll trim that ever so slightly. And then we'll take our drywall tape, and I already have it cut at an angle from doing the bottom ones. So if that would be your first one, just lay it over and then just cut that angle. But I try to orient it straight at the center. That's how you get that panel look like that. You don't have to do that, but I think it looks a lot better. Alright, so we'll just do that. Take a pen, mark our edge. Very carefully cut along our mark. And I like to cut these bottom corners off a little bit just to make sure that fits. All right. Alright, so we'll just push that down, and the nice thing about drywall tape is it's adhesive, so it sticks on its own pretty well, and especially once you paint that, the paint is like another layer of adhesive on top of it. So with these pieces here, nothing's going to get up against the edge of it and bump it and knock it off. So, and then as you go, you can just add rivets like I did down here, and that's just a 1/16 punch and some PVA glue, and you can kind of dress that up. There's our top with all of the pieces added. Now we're going to go and add some rivets, and we'll just take a toothpick with some PVA, and I just put a dot wherever I want to have a rivet. And then I've punched out some drink carton with a 1/16 inch hole punch, and I can just pick those pieces up with a hobby knife and set them in place. You can do that with super glue. I prefer to use PVA because it's a little more forgiving and I'm less prone to glue it to my fingers. But we'll just do that all the way around, and for a little extra strength you could also either put some more glue on top of that once that dries, or you can hit it with some Mod Podge and black paint. But they're fairly durable as is, and they look pretty good. And depending on the size of the rivets, you know, you could use the 1/16 hole punch, you can use a leather punch, you can use whatever you want, nail beads, whatever, and they should look great. I was experimenting with various configurations, things to put on top of this. I hit upon just using some pieces of 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch PVC pipe to build sort of a refinery stack. And what I'm going to do is take that PVC, I'm going to try and glue it together with some Plastrux cement, and we'll see what we get. That appears to have worked. I put some just up at the top, and put that tape on there just to hold it together. I hot glued a plate onto the bottom to kind of keep this together. I'm going to let that cure for a bit. I'll add some more down here. In the meantime, I'm going to add some detailing farther up. I've got this platform that I made out of a circular piece of granny grating. So what I'm going to do is add sort of a collar on there, so when that's all glued together it'll hold up. Also, I want to add just some extra detail to the various stacks. A little bit of hot glue and some chipboard that I cut to about a 5mm width. I added that bracing for that top ledge and added some other bits on the pipe just to kind of break it up a little bit. I also took that center that I cut out of the granny grating and glued that on top of there just for some extra detail. And this one is going to get some of these pipes. I'm going to try and make that stick up right there, but we'll see. I want that to be free moving and also come off for easier transport. I think this piece probably won't get glued on just because it'll be easier to move it about if I have to take it somewhere, if I can slide that off. So this whole thing will come apart and be kind of multi-useful. I stack other things on top of it if I need to. One thing to note on these spools, this particular brand, I'm not sure that all of them would, but a Pringles can happens to fit just perfectly on top of there. So you could make several different types of inserts or covers to put on these to kind of break up. If you wanted to do several of these stacks, they could be different or interconnected. Just pretty versatile. To fill this bottom space, what I'm going to do is add these spacers that I have cut to fit, and we're just going to hot glue them in place, much like we did with the walkway pieces on top. Just kind of follow the direction of those arrows and just lay a bead of hot glue in there on them, and that should hold them fairly well. There's our inside pieces glued in. We've started to put that carcass on the outside. I just took some drink carton and cut that to fit and then just glued it to each one of those internal bits. I've cut another piece. We're going to overlap this some, and actually we'll do it this way. Get that lip at the bottom and get that on there. That'll be fairly strong, especially once we put the corrugated on the outside. So get that hot glued into place. All right, and we'll just take that on around. I've cut out that outer piece of the corrugation. We're going to wrap that around. We'll do exactly what we did with that. We're just going to hot glue it as we go, a little bit at a time. So we'll start on one of the supports. Alright, so we'll just continue that around. When we get to the end, we're going to cut the backing off of this and overlap it, so we'll be back. So down at the end, we're going to cut off, I just cut a slit in the backing paper, and we're going to very carefully peel that off. And what that'll do is allow us to, here, let's even that up. We can kind of overlap it with the piece underneath, and that'll give that some strength. All right, so not bad. And if you wanted, you could add, access panels, doors, whatever. So we'll dress that up a little bit as we go. But basically, that's the secret of that construction right there. One note about working with corrugated stuff is if you want to add a panel or something that's flat, take another piece of this corrugated paper and flip it over and then glue that in place, and that'll give you a nice flat panel for a door or whatever. That's probably what we'll do here, is put an access panel on. After some careful measurement, some more of that 5mm strip that we cut from the chipboard, we just hot glued that in place. We'll add some rivets and some other pieces to make an access door. I think the key to scratch building a lot of this stuff is the detailing. Once you have the basic structure done, that's great, but if it's too plain, it's not going to live up to its potential. I probably don't put enough detail on some of the things that I build, so I'm trying to correct that. What I've got so far is I've started to build up that access door. I just cut out some 1cm square pieces of foam core and hot glued them on as kind of like a sensor point. And then I super glued some wire, and you can use any kind of wire you have. This happens to be telephone station wire that I had a scrap piece of. And just pre-bend it to, cut it to length, pre-bend it so that it fits and doesn't want to pull away from the piece, and then super glue it on, or hot glue it even, depending on the size of the wire. Here I've stripped the outer jacket off and just twisted the two conductors together and added those. And the nice thing about doing the foam core for your boxes there is if you have small enough wire like this, you can just push it down into that foam core, push it up in there to make a good fit. So we've also added some bracing / connector pieces, and I added some little bling pieces, little diamond pieces, whatever you want to call them, from the dollar store. And then once those are painted, those should make pretty good rivets. And I'm also going to go back and add rivets at this end piece, because originally I thought I was going to have something that would cover that, but I guess I'm not. So we'll add some rivets there. We're going to add some to our door, probably a door handle or a control panel or something, and just try to kind of dress this up and make it look, quote-unquote real. As you go, sometimes the piece will tell you that it needs more. In this case, I added some little indicator lights on the sensor boxes. We'll paint those in red and green or whatever. And then some little brackets for the cabling. Kind of whack that on there just to sort of give that the illusion of, yes, somebody cared about where this was and they made sure it stayed there. So and then we added our rivets to the end, and even just that one little rivet makes a big difference, because the eye sees that and says, oh yeah, that's firmly put down. So alright, so we're going to add a few more rivets, and then we'll set about trying to maybe prime this. To add some strength to the glued on things like rivets and whatnot, I'm going to go back over here before we prime it and add some of our Mod Podge and black paint mixture. I'm also going to add that to the drywall tape just to give it another layer to help hold it down. So we're going to do that all over that and our access door and some other bits, and we'll get ready to prime. In order to heighten the kind of the visual interest of these pipes, I also stippled on some of the Mod Podge and black paint mix, and it just creates a little bit of a texture, so when we paint our rusty metal, it'll kind of help sell that a little bit and not just be a huge blank space. But I only did it on the portions that were exposed. That's going to go down in there, so you don't have to do the whole thing. But it dries fairly quickly. I kind of kick myself because I need to add a ladder. I wish I'd done that before, but that's fine. I do stuff out of order all the time, so we'll make it work. So I'm going to cut that out and we'll get ready to put it on. To fabricate the ladder, I'm going to use some of the 1/2-inch square, what's called hardware cloth, is what it's always called when I find it at the hardware store. I don't know why that is, but it's what it is. So I'm going to cut out these sides. I just cut a piece to length, and I'm going to cut that edge off, And then we'll probably take every few of these and cut them off and bend some of these in, and then I'm going to drill some holes in that pipe and we'll glue it in place. Alright, so I've got that ladder put in place. I just measured off after I cut those legs and bent them. Just kind of marked with a Sharpie where they contacted the pipe. And then you have to drill in with a hand drill or whatever. Don't try to drill in like this. Try to drill in straight in relation to where the legs are going to go in. That'll help them fit a little better. If it's a slight angle, it's fine. A little bit of a friction fit is actually a good thing, but don't go that way because they don't want to clamp in. They want to go straight. So we're going to let that super glue dry for a bit and maybe put a little more on where this contacts some other pieces, and then we'll get ready to prime. To speed up the drawing of the super glue, I just added a little bit of baking soda, and that'll give it kind of a rusty texture anyway once we paint over that. So that's kind of an added benefit. And alright, so we're going to go prime this and we'll be back. Alright, the priming went pretty well except for the piece that I forgot to prime with all the rest of this, so it's outside drying right now. I just used a black spray paint and then went back over it with a dark reddish brown primer, kind of splotchy, and then did sort of a zenithal highlighting of a color called cinnamon. It's kind of an orangey red color. Both of those are in spray cans. You could easily brush this on, it would be no problem. It's just faster. I had the spray cans and they're there. So just like in the last project that I did, it gives it a pretty good result. I like the way it looks. So let's get ready to dry brush on some silver, and then we'll start picking out some more details. There's one screen on here we need to pick out. Whatever other the wires, whatever other things we can find, valve handle, that sort of thing. So let's see what we can do. I did notice that, I don't know if it's because of the temperature outside today or what, but my black primer, there's some spots I got a little heavy on and it has not completely dried, and it's been a couple hours, so I'm not sure what's going on there, but we're going to press on. So we're going to take and just use some regular craft silver paint and put some dry brushing slash over brushing on some of these, well, anywhere there's rust that we want it to look like rusty metal, which is pretty much the whole thing, we're going to add that on there. And this is a measure of to taste. You know, you could make it look as bright or as dull as you like. No real right answer. I go for a fairly rusty metal look, but your mileage may vary. Alright, so let's do the rest of that. I thinned out some black paint, just craft black paint with water, and mixed up some magic wash with that. And I'm just adding that to anywhere that needs a little extra definition. Valve handle, in between where these brackets are that hold the flooring on, putting a little around the rivets to try and define those a little better because they kind of blend in with that. So we will put that on the rest of the model and see what we get. Alright, once you get all of your metal dry brushed in the way you want it, then you can go back and start picking out details. I've started with some of the lights, some of this cabling, so we'll just continue on with that. To add a little bit more color, to make this a bit less monochrome, I'm going to add some more of the mint green, kind of seafoam green that I used on the last project. I'm going to start using that on all of my large industrial pieces to try and tie everything together on the table, and I'm just putting it on here with a sponge. I don't know that it shows up on camera real well, but it is on there and it is very distinctive in real life, so I'm going to continue putting that on and we'll see what we get. One note on using this, it's craft paint, it's very thick, so I thin it out, put a fairly good sized dollop on there, probably about the size of a pea, maybe a chickpea, and add 2 or 3 drops of water and then mix it and give it kind of a creamy consistency. If you try to use it straight, it'll be too thick. It's not probably going to work very well. But if you thin it out just a bit, you don't want it to be too runny because then it won't sponge on very well. But yeah, give it a creamy consistency and give that a shot. All right, and there it is. About the only thing we could add is maybe some markings and some signage, possibly some graffiti. This will be accessible by a ramp, much like the walkways that I built for the water treatment plant tanks. I'm going to use similar, identical really, walkways to get to this off of other terrain bits. So I'm not going to add another ladder or other things. I'm just going to add walkways later. And if need be, I can make a freestanding staircase to go up it, that sort of thing, but it's not entirely needed at the moment. So hopefully this was helpful. I hope you guys got some good ideas from this. This is getting to be more and more common items that, you know, miniature hobbyists are going to have around, or maybe you know somebody who's got some of these empty spools and can utilize them. So in any case, I hope you guys got something out of this. Remember to like and subscribe if you like this kind of content, and I hope you have a fantastic day.